Before we begin, imagine this. You want to fight for your country. You have 20 volunteers ready to follow you. You have courage. You have determination. You have a cause worth dying for. But you don't have a single rifle. Not one. Now imagine that the only way to get weapons is to take them from the enemy. This is the true story of Than Trong Mot, a young Vietnamese guerrilla fighter who built a fighting force from almost nothing during the First Indochina War. What happened next would turn a handful of poorly armed villagers into one of the most feared guerrilla units in the region. And it all began with a simple question: where are we going to find guns? In 1946, fierce fighting erupted in Hue, a historic city in central Vietnam. French forces gradually regained control of the city, forcing many Vietnamese resistance fighters to retreat into the mountains and continue the war as guerrillas. Among them was a young volunteer named Than Trong Mot. During a desperate battle in Hue, he was wounded while taking part in a daring assault against French positions. Unable to keep up with his unit's withdrawal, he was left behind in a small village to recover. When his wounds finally healed, his comrades were long gone. Most men would have tried to find their unit again. Then Trong Mot chose a different path. He returned to his home region and began gathering young men who still wanted to fight. One joined, then another, then another. Soon he had 20 volunteers ready to follow him. They had courage. They had determination. They had a cause worth dying for. But they shared one serious problem: not a single rifle among them. Every meeting ended with the same question: how are we supposed to fight without guns? The question haunted Than Trong Mot day and night. How do you build a guerrilla army when you don't even have enough weapons for one squad? The answer, he decided, was simple. If they wanted rifles, they would have to take them from the enemy. One evening, after another meeting, Than Trong Mot finally broke the silence. "We will have rifles." The men looked at him in surprise. "Where will we get them?" Mot smiled but refused to explain. "That's a secret." Then he added quietly, "The rifles will come from Hue." No one understood what he meant, but everyone trusted him. That conversation marked the beginning of the first operation carried out by Than Trong Mot's guerrilla unit. Years later, it would become known as the Battle of Lo Dao. For days, Mot and his men studied the movements of a local militia patrol that regularly entered the forest. The patrol belonged to a pro-French auxiliary force. Every time the guerrillas saw those rifles hanging from the soldiers' shoulders, they felt the same thing: desire. Those weapons represented survival. Without rifles, they could never become a real fighting force. When the day of the ambush finally arrived, nearly every man volunteered. Some were suffering from malaria. Several were weak from fever, yet none of them wanted to stay behind. Even sick men begged to be included. Mot selected only those strong enough to fight. Each man carried a machete, nothing more. No rifles, no grenades, no machine guns, just a blade and courage. Near an abandoned tea tree oil distillery deep in the forest, the guerrillas prepared their trap. Huge piles of dried tea tree leaves were scattered around the old buildings. One by one, the fighters crawled inside those piles and disappeared from sight. Each man carefully concealed the next. When the last fighter was hidden, Mot covered him himself. Then, unlike the others, Mot slipped away. He moved toward the edge of the forest to watch the approaching patrol. Everything unfolded exactly as he had hoped. The enemy soldiers entered the forest. Mot followed them from a distance, carefully guiding their movement toward Lo Dao. His heart pounded, not from fear, from excitement. The trap was working. Soon, the patrol arrived at the abandoned distillery. Nothing looked suspicious. The old buildings were still there. The piles of dried leaves lay untouched. Birds sang overhead. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The place looked peaceful, safe. The soldiers relaxed immediately. Some leaned their rifles against trees. Others stacked them beside the walls. A few removed their ammunition belts. Several sat in the shade. Others stretched out on the ground after the long march. One man used his hat as a fan. Another wiped sweat from his face. For the first time that day, they stopped being soldiers. They became tired men resting in the forest. That was the moment Moat had been waiting for. Attack! His voice exploded through the trees. Instantly, the forest came alive. The piles of dried leaves burst open. Guerrillas sprang out like ghosts. Machetes flashed in every direction. The attack was so sudden that the patrol never had a chance to react. Not a single shot was fired. Not one. The surviving soldiers grabbed whatever they could and fled in panic. Branches snapped. Boots pounded against the earth. Men shouted as they ran for their lives. The guerrillas chased them only a short distance. By the time the fleeing soldiers reached the Hainan River, their officer finally stopped to count his men. What he found terrified him. Half his patrol was gone, and none of the survivors dared return. Not one. Mott had no interest in pursuing them. The objective had never been to destroy the patrol. The objective was the rifles. His men regrouped and checked their own numbers. No one was missing. No one had been killed. Then they counted their prize. 6 rifles. 6 badly needed rifles, along with a full supply of ammunition. For the first time, Van Trung Mot's guerrillas held real military weapons in their hands. On the faces of those thin, exhausted young fighters appeared something they had not felt for a long time. Hope. Their little army was no longer unarmed. And this was only the beginning. 6 rifles were a victory, but 6 rifles were not enough. Then Trong Mot's force was growing. More young men joined every month. If the guerrillas wanted to survive, they needed more weapons. One evening, several fighters approached Mott with a suggestion. There is a militia platoon from Cowhai Outpost. They patrol the railway every day. Could we attack them? Mott did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a few trusted scouts and went to see for himself. For several days, he observed the patrol. Every morning, the soldiers marched along the railway line toward Mui Nye. As they moved through the countryside, they shouted loudly, "We can see you! Stand up, or we'll shoot!" To make their threats sound convincing, they occasionally fired a few random shots into the bushes. But nobody answered. Nobody appeared. Day after day, the same thing happened. Mott noticed something important. The soldiers were careful on the outward journey. But on the way back, they became careless. Nothing had happened for so long that the patrol had become routine, almost boring. That was when Moat discovered the perfect place, a stretch of land called Go Song. Local people sometimes called it elephant ground, because the shape of the land resembled the back of a giant elephant reaching toward the sea. A railway track cut directly through it. The terrain offered excellent concealment on both sides. Standing there, Mott began to form a plan. This time, they would not hide in bushes. This time, they would disappear underground. The guerrillas secretly dug fighting pits on both sides of the railway. Every shovel of dirt was carried away and hidden. Every pit was carefully camouflaged. If the enemy discovered even one position, the entire operation could fail. For nights, they worked in silence. When the preparations were complete, Mott selected only his strongest and most reliable fighters. Then he gave an unusual order. Cut hardwood branches. Sharpen them. Make the points as sharp and hard as possible. The men understood immediately. If they lacked rifles, they would use something even simpler. Sharpened stakes. On a dark, moonless night, the guerrillas moved into position. One by one, they climbed into the hidden pits and covered themselves. Mott walked through the ambush site one final time. Everything was ready. Now all they could do was wait. The next morning, the enemy patrol appeared exactly as expected. The soldiers followed their normal routine. They shouted threats, fired a few warning shots, and continued down the railway. Nothing happened. No resistance, no ambush, no sign of danger. Satisfied, they completed their patrol and began the return journey. This time, they were relaxed. Some laughed, others chatted with friends. Most carried their rifles casually over their shoulders. Not one of them realized that dozens of eyes were watching from beneath their feet. When the patrol reached the center of Gosong, Mott gave the signal. Attack! The ground erupted. Hidden covers flew aside. Guerrillas burst from the earth on both sides of the railway. The enemy froze in disbelief. Seconds earlier, The area had appeared empty. Now armed fighters seemed to be rising directly from the ground. The sharpened stakes struck first. Fast, brutal. Without hesitation, the guerrillas surged forward from both sides at once. There was no time for the enemy to organize a defense. No time to aim. No time to react. The attackers had simple orders. Strike. Move forward. Take the rifles. Do not stop. The patrol collapsed almost immediately. Men shouted. Some tried to run. Others dropped where they stood. Within moments, 18 enemy soldiers lay on the ground. The survivors fled in terror. Not one looked back. Mott did not waste a second. The objective had been achieved. He ordered an immediate withdrawal. The guerrillas vanished into the forest as quickly as they had appeared. Later, when enemy troops returned to investigate, they found a scene they would never forget. Bodies lay scattered along the railway. The attack had happened so quickly and so unexpectedly that rumors spread almost immediately. Who were these fighters? How could men with almost no equipment keep defeating armed troops? Stories about Than Trung Mot began spreading across the region. Some were exaggerated, others were not. Years later, captured prisoners would recall hearing French officers discuss the ambush with genuine concern. One officer reportedly warned his men, "Do not underestimate Than Trung Mot. Look at what he can do with nothing more than sharpened sticks." The Battle of Go Song became known among the guerrillas as the Battle of the White Soldiers. Men who had once possessed almost nothing had armed themselves by taking weapons from the enemy. And from that day forward, the name Than Trung Mot no longer belonged to an unknown village fighter. A legend was beginning to emerge.